Hello and welcome to the Principal Liner Notes podcast. This is the finale series, the finale season, the long goodbye and but not goodbye. That sounds so maudlin and morbid, but just to pause on this series. I am so honored and grateful to have back a true friend and just one of my favorite guests on the podcast. That's Meghan Lawson. Meghan, I think this is appearance four, I think
That
ish.
sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm grateful that you're here, and it's always a treat where we just riff, and we've been riffing before the podcast and catching up. So thank you for being here.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for having me. I always forget we're recording when we chat. We've talked about that before. These conversations keep me rooted in my humanity and all that is good and beautiful about this profession. So it is an honor to be here.
Well, the honor is all mine, and I think had it not been for this podcast, because and we've touched on this before. Um, we have followed each other over the years, through our PLN, and we've been cordial and supportive and professional, and we are still all of those things. And I think when I had invited you on the first time, that's where I think our friendship really deepened and became just something that I really value and cherish and respect. So I'm grateful for things like this podcast, which we've just kept the conversation going and the friendship going. So I'm grateful that you said yes.
You know, it's so interesting you say that about the first time we recorded because that is so true. It really was the first time we had had an in-depth conversation, although we had been following and admiring each other's work for some time. And there's very few friendships that I think I have a time capsule like that to go back and listen to and actually see a friendship blossom and start to deepen and unfold.
Absolutely. And you have given me so much and shared so much with me, and I know one of the things that I value is and it may and I think it was Megan in that first episode that we did together where you mentioned the bear to me
Yes.
and recommended it to me, and I had heard, my both my sisters had recommended, and I dismissed it. They're probably listening now like, you idiot. They still are like, yeah, Megan tells you about the bear and now you go watch it. Well, they're my sisters, and who cares. But anyway, I love them dearly. But I remember the way that you framed the show. I said, man, 'cause Nicole's told me about this, Courtney's told me about this, both my sisters, and now you've shared this. I need to see this show. And we have talked about every season of The Bear. And unfortunately, we've got season four is not upon us. So that might be when season four comes out next year, we might have to have a special episode of the Principal Liner Notes podcast. We'll bring it back for like a reunion episode, and once we get through season four, we'll talk about it.
I'll count on it because I would really look forward to talking about so many connections to life and our work happen when we watch that show unfold. It's a true work of art and heart.
Yes, yes, and it kind of echoes something that you mentioned in our pre conversation about the science of hope, and I know that's something that you're pursuing right now, and I purposely didn't dive deeper because I thought, man, that'd be something we can dive deeper in on the podcast. So here's the thing. So for folks that are listening about hope and the frame that is out there about hope, a frame that I don't always agree with, is you hear the hope is not a strategy. How dare you hope. That's not going to get points on the board for achievement tests. That's not gonna help you retain teachers. And I often get a little bit of backlash for celebrating Monday and trending the positive and I know I do these glasses are a little rose colored but I appreciate this kind of combination of hope, which is seen as this kind of gosh, gee whiz, thing in the same realm with science and the science of hope. So I want to learn more, Megan Lawson.
I love it. What a great setup for this conversation about hope. So, to start, I actually think hope gets a bad rep because it's conflated with wish, right? So, I I wish this happens. I wish you have a good day. I wish, versus I hope this happens. I mean, I think sometimes we mean I wish, but actual hope has action behind it. And it's so funny that you mentioned that about hope is not a strategy because that's often a story that I tell. And I think my former principal, when I was a teacher, hopefully she's okay with me sharing this story because I keep sharing it. So, Dr. Kim Peach Miller, who was the principal when I was a seventh grade English teacher, she asked me once in a team meeting. It was a March. We were really, really close to the state test. And she said, "Are all your students going to pass the state test this year?" And I said, "Well, I sure hope so." And she said, "Well, hope is not a strategy." And I remember thinking, like, "Woo, okay."
Yeah,
Um, and ironically, she was in a session that I was leading at a conference a couple years ago and sat in, and I was sharing some of the science of hope work in that session, and she came up to me after and she said, "Do you remember when I used to say hope is not a strategy?" And I thought, oh boy, do I ever remember. That was kind of terrifying to me as a teacher. And she said I was wrong. It turns out hope is the strategy. And I thought, wow, first of all, what a great leadership moment to be reminded that in the presence of more information, we can change our mind and admit that we believe something to be different and true now, or that we were wrong. But the other part of it is just that acknowledgement, even on somebody I've always looked up to, like that she sees the same value and hope was very affirming to me. So I started learning about the science of hope originally from Jamie Mead, who, when I first met her, she was the vice president at Battelle for Kids.
yeah,
And she did a deep study, I think even for a year, on the science of hope. And I think he's Dr. Um, Charles Snyder, C.S. Snyder, was sort of the original hope researcher. And there are books like Hope Rising that you can read to learn more about the science of hope. But she did a nice job of breaking down what hope is. And in the research, let me first just share like why hope is so compelling. And I find hope compelling in some of the same ways I find the happiness research compelling, because I think, like you said, a lot of people think hope sounds like just fluffy and nice to have, but what can it really do for us? Happiness sounds like, oh, that's great, but like what action is behind happiness? Um, but in the research, it turns out that hope is a stronger predictor of future success more than any other academic measure. So that's more than ACT, SAT, GPA. Hope is a stronger predictor. And I think that's not talked about very much in schools. I think for a lot of reasons. I mean, for one, that sounds like something that's hard to measure. And often what's hard to measure gets less attention. In our conversations of all the data that we talk about in schools, you don't hear a lot of conversation about happiness data or hope data. But um, hope, in a study of college freshmen, hope was the strongest predictor of whether or not a freshman would return for the second semester, even more than their grades. If they had hope, they were more likely to come back and try again. And so this just got me really curious about like, what is hope? Like, it sounds sort of up here in the clouds. What is it? And what she shares is that hope is really comprised of three elements. First, it's comprised of goals. So you have clarity about where you're trying to go. And then multiple pathways. to success, you can see lots of different ways that you might get there with that goal that you have. Some might call that way power. And then willpower, right? Resiliency. And what I'm finding is sometimes when we look like we're low on resilience or willpower, it's because we might be missing out on clarity in our goals and or clarity on the pathways to get to our goals.
Hmm.
And it's why Jamie Mead would say that often what looks like hopelessness or often what looks like laziness in our classrooms or in our schools is confused with, I mean, it's hopelessness. It's not always laziness. It might be hopelessness, right? Like, why would I try hard if I don't see a way out of my situation, if I don't see a future for myself, if I don't see anything beyond the now and what I'm in? So, this often feels like, ooh, it feels like really heavy and big. Like, yes, all three of those elements. But another little detail that I like to add when I'm working with groups is that hope, belonging, and engagement have reciprocity. So if you raise one, you actually raise them all. But if one falls, they all fall. So if you want to raise hope by raising belonging in your school or in your professional learning community or on your staff, um, you can raise both hope and engagement, or by raising engagement in your classroom, you can raise hope and belonging. But if one falls, they all fall. And so it's sort of this little delicate ecosystem that exists between these three things. And I think why that's important to acknowledge is also that teachers can lend students their hope, but only if they themselves have hope to give.
Hmm.
So I think sometimes in our efforts to be all about kids and all about what's best for kids, we leap over the adults sometimes who are caring for the kids. And if they themselves are low on hope, it's hard for them to create a high hope environment for their students. And if we presume that a staff member is being lazy when actually it's not laziness, it's hopelessness, right? We're really then missing the opportunity to help someone achieve their greater potential. And so these are the kind of things that I'm getting really excited thinking about. And I most recently was telling you, I heard a speaker recently talk about his experience in a maximum security prison. And he was saying that most of the inmates and some of the situations that occur in prisons, that prisons are some of the most dangerous environments, not because of necessarily crimes that people committed that got them into prison, but because they're low hope environments.
Hmm.
And when you don't have hope, you often have environments that are higher in fear, higher in negativity, and sometimes higher in violence.
Wow. Wow. I am so blown away by every bit of what you just shared. And I hope that folks bookmark or rewind or edit because that there's so much to unpack there, Megan. One, as I think about you are man, I'm speechless in a good way, because you're right. We interpret from a leader perspective, a teacher who's not delivering or whatever, laziness, and there may be a little bit of that, or that may be the case, but what is perceived as laziness could be simply a loss of hope, hopelessness that a teacher has. And you're right, we leapfrog over that as leaders and talk about what's best for kids and those things, but there is a very key ingredient that has to that has to be fostered, especially in what you talk about in your work, with legacy of learning, and you know when an educator or a leader, regardless, is in tune with legacy, there is a level there is a level of hope that is embedded in there, and the research shows that. I mean, when you were talking about the research, I immediately thought of John Hattie and collective teacher efficacy and belief, which drives that. Well, the catalyst for belief is hope. If
Oh, it's a good connection. Yeah.
and I thank you. I whip around that Visible Learning book, and I have the first one and the sequel, and I'm looking around for it. It's at work, but but wow.
Well, I've been listening to Hope Rising. I think that's the book that this has come from. And I was listening to a portion of it, and they were talking about how trauma actually changes our DNA. Okay, so if you're somebody, especially in those formative years, when you go through adverse childhood experiences, let's say you have a significant number of ACEs, and it trauma actually starts to have a negative impact on your DNA. Well, they're now uncovering that rising hope levels can actually restore your DNA, and they see the DNA start to change again when you're at higher levels of hope. And so high hope individuals are able to overcome seemingly impossible things because of their hope levels. So that's a really restorative way. As someone, I personally have a very high ACE score. If you take the assessment, my score is pretty high. I think I'm at a 7. And I think about the kinds of things like I never really thought about why I do some of the things I do, but I do things that I think restore my hope. I blog every weekend, and I reflect on the week and even the things that were hard, and then I figure out like how am I going to coach myself into what's going to happen next week. I mean, even just the goals, way power, willpower. The goal is to write once a week. And I have lots of ways I could get there. I could keep a notebook. I could just carry my phone with me to the pool that weekend. I have lots of different ways that I can achieve that goal of blogging every week. And that gives me the opportunity then to stay disciplined and to be resilient and still writing that post every week, even if I was on the road or if we have something hard going. I've written a blog post from a hospital room before. I've written about how, I had a family member who was struggling. And so I never really understood why that was true for me as far as my levels of hope. I didn't even know I had higher levels of hope. But now it allows me to understand the science of why I'm able to, I think, live a pretty happy, fulfilling life filled with hope, even though I went through some challenging things, as many people have as a kid.
Yeah, that and again, we neglect hope, in this kind of age of reason and logic, and but hope is really the backbone for a lot of things. I mean, as you share that, I and thank you for sharing the notion of just some of your own, being the product of trauma and growing up in that. Um, hope is part of that pull away from that, or way to cope and to process. And um so how do we keep hope in a in kind of as a focus? How in a from a leadership perspective, I appreciate, just in the personal experiences that you shared, like I have to set certain goals, and those goals are attainable for me, and I use that to build on my hope factor, and that's how I get through. From a leadership perspective, how can we use hope to build a legacy of learning, or a culture of hope in a schoolhouse or organization or district? What are some small moves, to use your term, that we use to build on that?
I'd love to hear from you too, from your seat as a principal, what moves you think you're making. I mean, I think this is making me realize we should take a step back and actually, in a sentence, define what hope is. Because even though I gave the components of hope, how is it defined?
Yeah.
And so, hope is the belief that tomorrow can be better than today, and we are the ones who can make it so. That's essentially what hope is. And I think one of the things for us to maybe start caring about is, do we feel we have hope? And if we already do, if we feel like we're a pretty hopeful organization or school, what are the conditions that have made that so? And how do we continue to nurture those conditions? And if we're seeing pockets of hope, what are the conditions that are true on those teams of teachers or in those departments or with those groups of students? And again, what are the conditions that make it's all about conditions, I think. And then if we feel like generally we're a school that's lower on hope, which I've seen and experienced, examples are sometimes schools with high turnover in leadership, high turnover in teachers, lack of clarity about the mission or the goal and their role in being able to achieve that and the pathway to get there. Then I think maybe honing in on those three components of hope, goals, way power, willpower. Willpower can usually come along if there's clarity in goals and shared purpose, shared development of our goals and our mission and where we're headed, and then also the multiple pathways to get there. And so I would focus on those types of things. I think making sure that we are clear about what we're about and where we're going and what we're trying to build here together, and then how we're going to get there. I think I've been in meetings as a teacher that were low on hope, because they might sound a little bit like, wow, our data's low. We got to get these scores up. Mm, right. And it's like, okay, so we, how? If it was that easy, we'd all already be doing it. So, just saying it doesn't really, that sort of kind of old school, like, be tough on what you expect, but not helping people get there it's falling short. That style of leadership is falling short. And I think it's the people who are willing to get in there with their sleeves rolled up to co-create and build together, figure it out together. I think that's the new way of leadership. I know that's my love language, is instead of, you know, somebody saying like, wow, that sounds really hard. Somebody saying, let's figure this out together. This is hard.
Yeah.
That feels a little more hopeful to me, I think.
And realistic. It's a beautiful, because again, hope is seen as Peter Pan, fantasy,
Mhm.
Star Wars, but yes, acknowledging that this is hard as hell, and acknowledging that there are levels of impossibility that we're going to face, but let's roll our sleeves up. Let's get into it. It's very much along the lines of moonshot thinking, which I'm a big fan of. And as I hear you share this, I think of President Kennedy's famous Rice University speech, where he says, "We choose to go to the moon not because these things are easy, but because they are hard." And he basically laid out a vision, a mission, a beautiful vision, but a mission that was not funded. There was no kind of real. No one had ever done this before. There was no precedent. No one had ever gone as far as the astronauts were going to go, and then less than a year later, he's killed, and yet people were compelled to keep the vision and develop the mission, knowing that this was impossible. The person that had laid this out is gone, and you know what? They met the deadline. They achieved the vision, and we landed a human being on the moon. We landed several human beings on the moon, and we're getting ready to do it again in the next few years. So, and all of that is rooted in hope, right?
I love that. I also love that story because I feel like that's an example of, I don't know, sustainable change, right? Like he was the catalyst to making something happen, and people made it happen long after he left. I got into a really interesting philosophical debate recently with a leader who I very much so respect. And we were on two different sides of a debate about sustainable change. Essentially, I was saying that I had learned some hard lessons over the year. In my first district office role, I believed that our strategy, in order to make things happen and make them happen fast, we needed to kind of empower the people around the principals. And we sort of worked around the principals, the busy, hardworking principals, to make things happen. And we left, most of us on that team, and off with us, all of that work went. And the principals stayed, and they weren't really a part of some of the changes that we had put into place. And that makes a lot of sense because they weren't a part of building it. And they, what commitment or connection did they have to it? Probably not much. They probably didn't even know half of the things that we had going on, to be perfectly honest with you. And then fast forward, the next district office role that I was in, I knew but the only way to sustainable change was through the principal, right? And the research actually supports this. The number one impact on student learning is the teacher, and the second strongest and highest impact on student learning is the principal. And so everything that we did, it took time. It went a little slower, but it was through and in partnership with our principals. And I was just talking to the superintendent in my former district, and she was telling me that the things that we set in motion are happening. They're still happening through the leadership of the people who are still there. Since I've now left, I mean, the principals are still carrying the work forward. They believe in it. They were part of it. We built it together. And I was I was giggling at myself a little bit, thinking on the other side of this conversation, like maybe you're just mad that you didn't figure it out. Like maybe you're just mad that you don't think sustainable change is a real thing because the person's argument was, off we go, and what did it really matter in the end, because off with us goes the good work. And like it was a much more uplifting conversation than that. But let's not let people who maybe they haven't figured it out yet for themselves discourage us from trying. And I think that's the lesson in that moonshot thinking story that you told about Kennedy as well. Somebody else before him could have said, never going to make it to the moon. Trust me, everything that I did while I was in office, it's already torn down and it's gone, and gone with my leadership. So is that. But if we continue to operate that way, like what will happen to the world? What will happen to the future? I think we all want it to matter that we were here.
I think it's important for leaders in thinking about a small move. Um, and as you were sharing your response to the Kennedy thing, I took note of. I just wrote down the word catalysts for hope. And when we think about a catalyst, it is synonymous with a small move. It's something that is, but it has a larger impact. And I might be misinforming the word a little bit here, but I think it's important for leaders to not only be in tune with the small moves and be intentional about making small moves, as you so beautifully write in Legacy of Learning. But I also think being in tune with the people in your building or district or department or wherever it is that are those catalysts, that are those Kennedy-esque voices that are laying out this vision, or are trying to make those small moves. And you have to have some action. You have to have some sustainability. So I would encourage the leaders who are listening now, who are tuning in now, and you'll probably hear this episode probably around the end of this is October 5th when we're recording, probably the end of October, and is when this episode will air. And right now, October in the school year, this is the honeymoon's over. I got to get through Halloween. I got to get through Thanksgiving. Oh my God, winter. I got to get through all the high holy days and the pageantry, and we're burning out. Um, I think maybe one way to avoid that burnout or to get through that burnout is tuning into the people who are the catalysts, those small but steady voices that are, and maybe they're saying things that you don't want to hear, but they're a voice of hope. There's a resonance of hope, and being very in tune with that and intentional with that, I think, is one way to do that.
I appreciate you bringing us back to small moves too, because I think talking about, well, I mean, even talking about putting a man on the moon, it's big, it's ambitious, but at the end of the day, they probably broke it down into a lot of little small moves where a group of people, a committed group of people over time played their role in making something possible. people. It wasn't one person who took the lion's share of the work. And I suspect I don't know the full story of, I didn't get to see their work plan for how they did it.
Yeah.
But I think that's an important lesson for all of us, as you said, as we work to sustain and do great work every day. And you're also reminding me of sort of the difference between burnout and bore out. So, bore out was a term that I had not heard until about a year ago.
Hmm.
Um, Burnout is when we are doing big work we believe in, just like you've described, and we're working so hard on it, but we aren't able to sustain the pace and volume at which we're trying to accomplish this work. Bore out is a lack of meaningful work. So
Hmm.
it's a lack of wholeheartedness in the work, and we're not doing enough things that we find to be meaningful and important, and that feed our souls. I think you could maybe attribute bore out to a sense of hopelessness. But there's a quote by the poet David White. I know we both were English teachers, so we can enjoy a little quote from a poet here. But he says that the antidote for exhaustion is not necessarily rest, it's wholeheartedness. And so sometimes it won't be as much about pacing ourselves in the small moves, although I think that is absolutely mission critical. I think it's also important to check in on, do we have a sense of meaningful meaning in our work and purpose, personal meaning and purpose in our work. And I'm not saying like, oh, teachers, remember your why. I think that's very offensive. Nobody forgot why they got into this profession. But I think the day to day grind of the different things that we have to do can wear on us and squeeze out some of the humanity and some of the greater heart that brought us all here in the first place if we're not careful.
Beautifully stated. And building on that, you in Legacy of Learning talk about a practice that I think could serve as a doorway to building hope in the building, and that is the 30-second conversation, the craft conversation from our mutual friend Mike Rutherford, who you quote extensively in the book. I'm proud to be a fellow North Carolinian with Mike, and have had the opportunity to hear him speak and experience his PD as a teacher and as a principal. Um, but I definitely see that practice as being one way to ignite or tune into that catalyst of hope within your realm of influence or sphere of influence.
Oh, that's such a great connection. I deeply believe in 30-second feedback, and I'm excited to do some learning with a group this year with the Mike Rutherford himself. But yeah, I think there's a lot of hardworking people who are left feeling unseen or not appreciated for all the small moves and efforts that they're putting in school. And you're bringing us full circle. I think that that's also a great way to grow belonging, right? Like, I see you, I appreciate you, I value you. Look at what a difference your unique contribution is currently making in our ecosystem. And don't forget that when we raise belonging, we can raise hope and engagement. So I think it's a great way to, it's a great move that does a lot in a very short period of time, as short as 30 seconds.
And for those who may not be familiar with the 30-second feedback and its relation to small moves and legacy of learning, I always love when you talk about it and write it.
Yeah,
So could you
sure.
just kind of revisit that for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So 30-second feedback is essentially this, and if we had Mike Rutherford here himself, he would do it much more justice, but I'll give you my Meghan Lawson version. So essentially, you might go with a partner, and let's say it's an administrator and a coach, but it can be any combination of people. Teachers could do this with other teachers, and it's a positive feedback protocol. It's about elevating the good and celebrating the good that you want to continue seeing. We need to be just as disciplined about that as we have been. In fact, even more disciplined about that than maybe we have been about addressing deficits. So you go into a classroom and you just let yourself sort of look around and enjoy for a while. And you might spot something that you find interesting and compelling, and when you do, you move yourself closer to where that is in the classroom. let's say it's a teacher working at a kidney table with a small group of students while other students are in stations or have another anchor activity they're working on. And you're looking at this teacher who's teaching at the kidney table and you're watching the moves that the teacher's making and the way that the students are responding. And then before you leave, you either say this to the teacher, or in our case, in my previous district, we would write it on a post-it note. And there's a formula for it. You provide them what's called 30-second feedback. You start with, thank you so and so for having me, a little greeting, or as Mike calls it, the cushion.
Mhm.
And then there's a cause and effect because you want to be really specific about what was going well so that they can see the thing that they should continue doing in the classroom. Like when you ask students to turn and talk, it elevated the amount of participation in the room. And when students are more engaged, it deepens their learning. Like cause effect. You did this, you asked them to turn and talk. This was the impact on learning. So teaching, learning, or cause effect. And then you just finish with a nice move and then off you go, whether that was on your post it note you left on the door or in person with that teacher. And I've seen a lot of teachers hold on to those post it notes, even some teachers who surprise me, even some teachers who seem to not be much of the let's get in our feelings together kind of people. And many of them have shown me desk drawers full of their post it notes. And it's been a reminder to not underestimate the power of a small move like that. And it's much more powerful than a good job, you're doing great, appreciate you, thanks so much. That's all nice. But we all know that more specific feedback is more meaningful.
And it's lasting and it's digestible, and again it serves as that catalyst for hope that we need to feed our soul and have that kind of active reminder that there are good things happening, that there is good in the world, that there is good in the building, but then also to empower the catalyst who is in front of us to continue and to establish or to continue to establish or begin to establish their legacy of learning, their legacy of leadership, and you're starting a chain reaction of just absolute goodness that you can harness and that you can sustain and build upon. So I appreciate you framing it that way, and I can't express my gratitude for you sharing it that way, Megan, but then also our mutual admiration for Mike Rutherford and I may have to do a road trip out to Ohio again, and I'm gonna crash that PD in some
You're
way.
more than welcome. We'd love to have you.
I do need some hours for the license renewal. Uh,
Come on up to Ohio. We would love to have you.
but yeah, I may take you up on that, friend. But anyway, Megan, gosh, you've been so gracious with your time and gracious with your insight as you always are. And before we sign off, I want to reiterate my gratitude for the gift of hope that you bring, the gift of friendship that you share. We are lifelong friends, and I'm very grateful and cherish that gift, and just I'm thank you for everything that you've done for this podcast and the support that you've given for this series, and I'm looking forward to just continued conversation and friendship with you and a reunion episode. I've put it out there. We'll do it next year. We'll have a reunion episode. We'll get the band back together and talk about season 4 of The Bear.
Well, I am deeply grateful for both your friendship and the opportunity to be on this podcast as a longtime listener and a longtime reader of your work. I know that I am in good company with many people across the entire country who benefit from your voice, but also the way that you make space for many voices. So, thank you for being the kind of person who, um, I guess, really makes others feel like we can be even more. We can be everything that we dreamed we could be. I mean, I think that's what true leadership is. And you do that in a very authentic, selfless kind of way. And I think it reminds me of the kind of person and leader I want to be. So thank you for that, friend.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Chef.
Thank you, Chef.
Megan Lawson, she's a true friend and a true inspiration. She is the author of a wonderful book that I have promoted many times on this podcast, and I will continue to do so. Find this book, Legacy of Learning: Teaching for Lasting Impact. Meghan Lawson's book is all the things that you need it to be. And if you are done reading the book, or if you've not read the book, go out, run out and get it, and then subscribe to Megan's weekly blog, which is just something that I always get great just a great buzz when it lands in my inbox. In addition to our wonderful friend, who I would be remiss we didn't mention, Lauren Kaufman, and just her great work and her great podcast, and all the love for her. You can Megan, all of your social media channels. I will put in the show notes. I know that you're very generous and very encouraging on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and X. So thank you for helping make not only my world a better place, but a better place for others.
Well, the pleasure is truly all mine. So thank you, Chef. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Don't forget to share with the world your dreams, your visions, your ideas. Most importantly, don't forget to share with the world hope, because the world needs hope, and the world needs you, and the world is a better place with you in it. This is Sean Gaylord signing off from the Principal Liner Notes podcast with my dear friend and chef and bandmate and partner in hope, Meghan Lawson. Thanks again, and look forward to catching you on the flip side.